Okay. I hope the internet's going to run well. It was a bit slow before, so Barbara, if something happens, just let me know maybe by WhatsApp. Okay, so let's bring up the text. Okay. Oops, wrong one. Here we go. All right, we're holding the Gemara on Megillah. We're holding Ches Amid Beis 8.2. Middle of the subject of the laws of a zav, a person who has an emission that makes you impure, which is the highest level of impurity. So we're just to go back a second. Hey Avi, on Ches Amid Beis, we're holding the last little piece of Gemara on the mission that was dealing with the difference between a zav, someone who has a seminal emission 2 days in a row, which makes him a zav, like a small zav, or one who has three, which would require also to bring. We said the Mishnah says that if you one who has three has to also bring a korban, right? So we said ein bein zav shtei riyos l'rayis shalish riyos ela korban. The only difference is a sacrifice. And so we were trying to discuss to figure out how do we know, first of all, that there's a concept of two or three riyos, that there's a difference, there's two levels of tumah. So we quoted the pasuk in Vayikra 15 that talks the first Reb Simai says that first we have a pasuk that says two times the word tamei by zav, and then we have three times tamei. So there's the first pasuks 15:2 and 15:3. 15:2 says two times tamei, three times pasuk 15:3 says three times tamei, and from this we learned Reb Simai says that we have a zav of two riyas and a zav of three riyas. Now the question is, what are the differences of the two? So we don't know yet the difference of the two. So we have a second limud, that was the limud of who was the limud of? That was the limud of that was the limud of, it says mizavoy. It says that was the limud of who said that? Somebody says the carbon mizavoy. The Brisa says, mizavoy. So from mizavoy, that you have to bring a carbon only, it's coming to only from the zav of three riyas, but not the zav of two riyas. So the word mizavoy from his emission is from his tumah of zav, comes to teach us that it's only, not all cases of zav needs to have a carbon, a sacrifice. It means that after the person becomes pure, you have to count 7 days, and after you count 7 days, then you have to bring a carbon. So the carbon is only applicable to someone who has three sightings, three episodes. Now the question, but everything else we've learned from the psukim of 1 to 15, chapter 15, was that we learned also from another pasuk that says mizavoy to teach us that a person who has two riyas, who has two episodes, has to count 7 clean days, and not like the zava, the woman who has an out of her cycle, she has a episode of bleeding, that if she only has two episodes, then she has extreme levels of impurity, but she doesn't count 7 days. The 7 days of purity only happens if she has three episodes, three sightings. So the question is that we have is, so what's the difference? So we have a special pasuk to teach us that you count also mizava, you count visipar, and which means that all countings, we want to learn from the word mizavai that in all countings, which is the counting of both the zav of two episodes and three episodes, has to do a counting of 7 days and has to be purified. So the question is, we have a question that before we wanted to save. So just go back one paragraph. This is what we learned last week. Don't ask a question. That even though the zav is so impure that even anything that supports his sitting or lying, even if it's no direct contact, lo yitain sphere shiva, should not still need to count 7 days. Just like the woman, she also very as impure that she causes even things that she lies on or sits on that support her without direct contact. Nevertheless, she doesn't have to count 7 days. She only counts 7 days if she has 3 sightings. Talmud Leimer mi zavai v'safar. Miksa zava, even if there's a little bit of zav, meaning doesn't have all 3 episodes, nevertheless he has to count 7 days to become pure. Limad al zav b'ashtei shatan sphere shiva. That person who has a zav who has 3 episodes still has to count 7 days. So what we have is, hey Shuki, we're going to have one more complicated class and then we go into easier stuff of stam of sefer. Stam means in the sefer Torah, and mezuzah the laws of writing a Torah. But we have one more mission that's difficult, and then we're going to go kind of get a little easier. But here we're learning about the laws of zav. So we have this extreme impurity of a zav and a zava. Both of them have emissions from their body that are not that are considered to be extremely impure. They're obviously different. The man has a semen, a woman has a woman has a bleeding, but she's out of her time of her cycle. She's extremely impure, but she only has to count 7 days, clean days, meaning that she has no sighting of blood if she has 3 sightings. But a man, even on 2 sightings of his seminal discharge, which is something that's considered not a balkari, so like the laws of Zavar, we're not learning here the laws of Zav, we're just learning about the differences between a Zav that has 2 sightings or 3 sightings. He also has to count 7 days. He just doesn't have to bring a korban. He just doesn't have to bring a sacrifice. So now Rav Papa, the reason why we're going over Chazar a bit, because it's kind of, Rav Papa asked a question to Abaya. Amalei Rav Papa Abaya. So we have, again, sorry for repeating this, so we should have it clear. We have chapter 15, it says, we have chapter 15 that says, the first verse that says, sorry, well, here we have the pasuk. So for chapter 15, verse 15 says the word mizavai. It's telling us about the requirement for the zav to bring a korban. What zav has to bring a korban, a sacrifice, as an atonement for this episode of impurity is only a zav that has 3 sightings. Then we have another verse that talks about the counting of 7 days. That's separate. This counting of 7 days. And so the counting of 7 days is v'chiyitar azav mizavai. We learned 2 things. One is we learned mizavai to mean that even if he has also leprosy, where he can't totally get pure, he still counts the 7 days, at least to count the 7 days to get rid of the zav. V'safar, so mizavai v'safar, we want to learn 2 things. One is that he counts even if he's a leper, means he has a second extreme impurity. He still counts even though he can't totally get himself impure because he has to get rid of the leprosy. But that doesn't stop him from counting 7 clean days to at least put that out of the way. And also we learned that it applies to Visifralai, the counting 7 days, Shivas Yamim, to count 7 days, applies even to a Zav, someone who has 2 episodes, not only 3. Okay, so now Rapapa, but what do we have in these verses? We have the word Mizavai twice. The word mizavai in verse 15 is excluding someone who has 2 sightings that does not have to bring a korban. The word mizavai in verse 13 is includes a person that has 2 sightings to have to count 7 days. So this is the question where we're holding now. Amalei Rav Papa Labaya. So Rav Papa says to Abaya, Maishnoi hai mizavai. Why do we use the mizavai of verse 13? That we talks about the counting of 7 clean days, the marbi zav bal shtei riyos, that comes to include a zav who has 2 experiences of emissions. Umayshna hai mizavai. Why does the mizavai of verse 15, the mimayit be zav bal shtei riyos, it's coming to exclude that only a zav of 3 emissions has to bring a sacrifice? How does the word mizavai go both ways? Now, we're a small group today, so we're going to learn the Rashi's a little better. Seemingly, this, if we just go further, it's a good question, right? But the problem is that we can't. The Rashi, and from what I understand, what Reb Steinsaltz understands from Rashi, is that Rashi is coming to say that there was never a thought really that the word mizavai could mean 2 opposite things of including or excluding, because that in grammar that's very challenging. because it's either if the makeup of the word mizavai, right? So what is the root word in mizavai? The word zav, right? So zav is the person who has the mission. When you add the mem and the vav, it's giving us context of what we're talking about. That means something's happening here. So we're talking about a law. So let's say the law of a sacrifice, that he has to bring a sacrifice to be totally to get an atonement. So the mizavoy, the mem, like we said, like Rabbi Steinsaltz explained before, is coming to teach us something about what kind of zav are we talking about. Meaning it's an exclusive, it's excluding something. It's not including something. So it's excluding someone who saw only two emissions, that he doesn't have to bring a carbon, a sacrifice for his atonement, to atone himself for his episodes. But then the word mizavai, if the grammar is teaching us to exclude something, so the grammar, even in the Havamim, it can't be teaching us to include something. It's not just a question of why do we apply it two different ways, but there has to be, it means what Rashi is going to explain is that the grammar stays the same. The question is, what are we excluding? That's why Rabbi Steinsaltz, I think, understands Rashi. So let's just see the Rashi inside. So Rashi says this: Mizavai v'sipar. The first mizavai, which is the second one that we mentioned in the Gemara, meaning verse 13, that deals with accounting, and we want to use the word mizavai ultimately to include someone who has two emissions that person also has to count. The Rashi say, so how do we understand the word mizavai? Again, the word mizavai is not, it's coming to teach us. There's weight to that word. It's coming to teach us something. So drashasly, we use it as a drasha. The miktsas zoiv, that only a little bit of zav. V'lashmin, and the miktsas zavin toinin sfira shiva. And what do we want to apply it to? That even a little bit of zav, meaning a person that doesn't have all three emissions, only has two, also requires to count 7 clean days in order to get out of that impurity. Ubaha inyan, shamina mina zav bal shtei riyas, lisfira, that is a zav who sees two emissions has to count. So that's what we use the word mizavai. Umaishna, and what is the difference in verse 15? Mizavai deliil that we quoted before, the chsiv legabe carbon v'lay darshes le mixas zavai la asuye zav, to include a zav of two riyas the carbon, and a mixas zavin, there's only a little bit of the category of zavs. Darshale umukmis le abal shalish riyas, we apply it to someone who sees three emissions, and automatically it comes to exclude bal shlei riyas. So if you just look at the wording over here in Rashi says the miktsas zoiv and the miktsas zavin. So Reb Steinsaltz is going to explain that he says like this. If I understand him correctly, grammar is not my thing, but let's try it. He goes, it's not meant that the term from his emission could be understood inclusively or exclusively. Rabbi Steinsaltz, that was one of his main things, was the grammar, right? So you can't say that the word can't. It means even in the question, you can't even assume that the word itself, not what the word is coming to teach us. There's difference what the outcome of the word is, or what the actual word, how the word is triggered. So you can't say that the word itself is both inclusive and exclusive. That's not possible. As in both possibilities suggested by the Gemara, it is exclusionary. According to one possibility, it comes to exclude a zav. According to other possibility, it comes to minimize the number of emissions required. So basically, Reb Steinsaltz is saying both of them are excluding. The difference is, what is it excluding? In the case of mizavai of carbon, it's coming to exclude that the type of zav. That a zav of two riyas doesn't have to bring a carbon. In the word mizavai in verse 13, it's also coming to exclude. It's coming to exclude the requirement of episodes needed to count 7, and therefore automatically it includes also one who sees 2. Means not all the seeings has to be there, even if it only has half partial episodes. It's also good enough. You also still need to count 7 days. That's the point. That's what Reb Steinsaltz understands in Rashi. If anyone understands differently, please come in, because this is a bit of a shver inyan. It comes to minimize the number of emissions. So the question is the number of emissions, or to exclude the type of zav, thereby increasing the number of those who entered under the rabbinic, the rubric of zav. So it means automatically, if it's excluding see how many episodes you need, so automatically someone who sees 2 times is also included to count 7. And that's why I think it understands from Rashi, the Rashi is like the mixas zoiv versus the mixas zavin. Zoiv means how many, what I think if the Rashi is like mixas zoiv, what kind of, what zoiv are we talking about? 1 or 2, a person of 2, a person of 3, or are we, how many episodes of zavin are required? Only partial episodes. So again, both of them are excluding. The question is, are you excluding the number of episodes, or are you excluding the type of zav? So it means what Rabbi Steinsaltz is getting from Rashi. I think he's taking this from Rashi. He doesn't say he's taking it from Rashi, but I think what he's basically understanding the rules of grammar. But in the rules of grammar, seemingly what Rabbi Steinsaltz is saying, it's not possible that there's never even a havim in the Gemara that it can mean both. The outcome could be different. It means when one it is excluding and one's including, but in the grammar of it, they're both excluding. The question is it excluding the requirement, or is it excluding the type? All right, I hope that's understood. So that's the question. But at the end of the day, but even though both of them, the word is both exclusive, it's coming to exclude. Nevertheless, the outcome is different. Here, it's coming to exclude. It's excluding different. It's focused on different things. Because in theory, you could throw it the other way around. You could say also by the carbon, it's excluding how many episodes you need in order to bring a carbon. We could have done the reverse. And the excluding in verse 13 is coming to exclude one who only sees 2. Right? Because if the word itself is only excluding, why are we focusing on the type of zav or the number of visuals required for this that we're talking about, whether carbon or counting? So Omer Lei, so Abaye answers Rapapa, Isaka daita chayle mu'utehu dasa, lishte kramine. So he's saying if you want to say that our pasuk, the pasuk in verse 13 that says that a person, but we're learning to understand that the word mizavayu is v'sipur means to say that a person who has only partial sightings, episodes, also has to count 7 days. And so if you're on being saying, sorry, it's coming to exclude that one who has 2 episodes doesn't have to count 7 days. So it just should be quiet. Shouldn't say the word mizavayu. So v'chi tema, if you're going to say, but if we're going to not have the word mizavayu, so asi midina shemeres yom kineged yom techiach. So if you want to say we have a kal v'chomer, that if it's able to make mishka v'moishav tami, if it's so severe that it can make anything, even not by contact but just by support, right? You could lie on 2 mattresses or 2 cushions without touching the second cushion, the bottom cushion, but still it supports you. So that's a high level of impurity, means you didn't touch it, but the fact that it supported you, or you sit on 2 things, so the fact that it supports you, it also becomes tameh. So that's a very high level severity. So surely you would need 7 counting days. But I said no, you don't need. We have the proof from Zava. Zava also, a woman who sees only 2 sightings of blood outside of her cycle has also that severe level of impurity. Nevertheless, she doesn't have to count 7 days. So therefore, Bechite Masi Medina, we would learn from Kal V'chomer. We wouldn't learn from Kal V'chomer. Shemeres Yom Kineged Yom Techiach. So Lishte Kramina Mehechitis Lasfera. So if you think that's coming to exclude, we would never include it. So we just take out the word mizavai. And then we would never think to add that one who sees 2 episodes has to count 7. And we have basis to say that it's not a kal v'chomer because Zav also doesn't have to. A Zav of Turius also doesn't have to count 7 days. That if it's so severe that it could even make the cushions or the couches, the things that support its lying and sitting, that it also have to count 7 days because it's so severe impurity. Because we could have a woman who only sees 2 episodes outside of her cycle, nevertheless she's only tummy for 1 day. She doesn't have to keep 7 days. But we had another use for the word mizavai, coming to teach us in verse 13 that a person who has both leprosy, unfortunately, and also is a zav person who has these impure emissions, is that from zav means you should start counting even though you still didn't finish dealing with your leprosy. Im kein lichtef kravich hazav. It didn't have to say mizavai. Again, this is words. We could have just said that when the zav becomes pure, meaning to say even though he's a Metzorah. Why does it have to say mizavai? Mizavai is coming to teach us more than just that you have to count, that you could count right now and you don't have to wait until you come pure from your leprosy. Velishte can be quiet. Mizavai lamali. Why do we have to add mizavai? Just the word zav would be enough. Limidal zav bal shtei riyah shatan sfir shiva. Obviously, it's coming to teach us that over here, what it's excluding is the requirement, not excluding the person. I mean, not excluding the zav itself. That it's not coming to exclude a zav of 2 riyas, because then we just didn't have to say the word mizavai. We never would have included him in counting 7. And we don't need to. Because even if you're severely impure, a woman who is a zava shows that if she only has 2 sightings, 2 episodes, she also doesn't have to count 7. She only has to count 7 clean days if she has 3 sightings. Okay, so that's the Gemara's answer to the question, and that helps us. And we finished this Mishnah on this subject. Again, this is not its place really of the laws of zav and zava. This is the laws of Megillah. But that's how the Mishnah worked. That's how Rebbe worked. That he would add in we're going through different things that have 2 things that could be similar. We started off with the first Adar and second Adar with a leap year and a regular year. So we're going to other things throughout Torah that there could be comparisons, and we're trying to find out the differences. Some of the differences according to the Rashba. Just Rashi says, why does it have to say mizavai? Just say azav. We don't have to add mizavai. Means we had 3 options in the pasuk. The pasuk 13 again. Pasuk 13 just quickly is talking about the counting, right? So the option number 1 is v'chiyitar. When he becomes pure, we don't have to say zav. We know we're talking about zav. All 13 verses before that have been talking about the zav. So obviously we know what we're talking about. So it should have just said v'chiyitar when he becomes pure. Had it just said v'chiyitar, then we would have thought, okay, if a person's a leper and a zav, you can't start counting until you deal with your leprosy. So therefore, the pasuk could have just said v'chiyitar hazav to say that if you have leprosy, focus on your zav situation. The fact that it says mizava is a third thing that it's adding. And what's a second thing that it's adding? What's the second thing that it's adding? That also one who has 2 episodes has to count 7 clean days. Why do you have to the extreme mizavai? That only a little bit of sightings, again, it's excluding. We're excluding the requirement of 3 sightings to count. Again, grammar is really not my thing, but I just wanted to say the fact is that verse 13 comes before verse 15. If it was in the reverse, that 15 came before 13, it would be easier to understand this, at least on my limited level, because it means when you exclude the requirement of sightings versus to exclude the type of zav, the first thing I would apply the exclusion to would be the type of zav versus the number required for zav. If I had the first came verse 15, that basically was excluding the zav of 2 riyas from a carbon. So then it's a chiddush that I'm applying the mizavai to exclude the amount of episodes, because we already said we have to exclude what we would have thought the word mizavai means. But to start off, that mizav is coming to exclude the amount of sightings versus the type of zav that seems to be that I wouldn't go to that. That means I'd first think that the word, if I'm looking to exclude something, I'd first look to exclude the type of zav. That would come first, and then you would have to, because you're coming to do a chiddush, that's not what we're talking about. So then the pasuk has to come teach us that. But to have the first word before we know what the second word, before we have the second verse, and to say lechatchila, it's coming to exclude the amount of episodes required for counting 7 days, I think is pulling it a little further in the idea of exclusion versus excluding the type of zav. But that's just the way I see it. Okay, obviously the Gemara didn't see it that way, and neither did God. All right, let's see the mission. Let's go to the next mission. Ein bein Metzorah lemuskar lemetzorah muchlit ele priya uprima. So again, this is not the laws of Metzorah, but we know that there's a thing like this. Muskar means to quarantine. What is the laws of a Metzorah? What happens with the Metzorah? Metzorah has a sighting of what looks like leprosy. Now, in order for the leper to be considered a leper, that's conclusive. That it's a sure thing that this person is leper. It's not enough to have the signs of leprosy. There has to also be that the leper is that we can see clearly it has that it's muchlat, it's been confirmed. In order for it to be confirmed, there's certain conditions that the Torah says, whether it's spreading or there's two white hairs or there's all the different conditions of how we come to confirm the leper. But there's two stages. There's first the muskar, means we check it, and same thing applies to the house, right? You have leprosy in the house, so we check it, so we close the house down for 7 days. Then if it spreads, if not, if it goes away, if it becomes lighter. So there's a process of how the Metzorah, the leper, becomes impure. But the two main processes are to quarantine and check to see how after a week or after a certain amount of time, how is this person doing? Is it spreading or not? And that the kohen has to check. So we have the muskar, which is the person who's been quarantined, so we could check. And we have the muchlat when it's already been established. Even the person who's a Metzorah muskar, the only way you get into quarantine is if you have solid signs of leprosy. Just we haven't confirmed yet if it's spreading to the extent that it makes you a confirmed leper. If it doesn't spread and if it just stays, so then it's not and it has certain of the signs, so then we don't consider it leprosy. But what happens in that time when you're in quarantine? Are you okay? Or is there also a level of impurity, right? So it says a muskar, even a person who's a quarantine, has all the effect of a confirmed leper. The difference is you don't have to do priya prima. Priya prima means to leave your hair and to rip your clothing, which is part of a sign of the leper who leaves their hair long and has to. That's only a confirmed leper. Okay, that's what the Mishnah says. Those are the only two differences. Again, the right away the Mefarshim jump on that and say, oh, there's this difference and there's another difference. There's even a question about marital relationships. There's some opinions that hold that there's that the Gemara Moed Katan discusses if a person even there's even a thinking of Rashi to think that a muskar, someone who's in quarantine, is possible even if a confirmed can have relations, one who's in quarantine cannot. There's other differences that the Gemara in the laws of leprosy they jump on it the Mefarshim. Okay, but Rashi says Masnisim priya prima. They have to rip his clothes, tear his clothes, and leave his hair long. Muchlet, what is a muchlet? What does it mean confirmed? After the person has been quarantined and it's finished. And the additional, or whatever is the conditions for that they're checking for after the quarantine, it meets the criteria for the person to be classified as a confirmed Metzorah, then that's called a muchlet. Okay. Okay, that's in the laws of it. What about the purification of it? A person who comes out of, because if we're saying that even a quarantine one is considered impure, what is the process of cleansing? So he says, the only difference is in the process of becoming purified. Even from quarantine, you have to become purified. And it's the counting, obviously 7 days, like we said. Nevertheless, the difference is you don't have to do a total shave of your body. We know that the Metzorah has to totally be removed all hair from their entire body. Vitziparim, I have to bring 2 birds as an atonement. So those 2 things are not required for a quarantine Metzorah. So the Gemara says right away. The Gemara jumps on the question: what about being expulsion? Right, we know that the Metzorah has to be thrown out of all 3 camps. Right, we learned Haftorah, the Dal Mitzrayim. Right, Gehazi was outside the camp. We learned in Sanhedrin that was Gehazi. He was the leper. So halinin shiluach v'tumah zev zeshavim. But in all levels of impurity, and in obviously the brackets in the tumah is because there's a question about that, or the idea of expulsion are equal to both a quarantined Metzorah or a confirmed Metzorah. What's shiluach mean? Expulsion means chutz l'chaim ha'seir, sent out of the city. You have to be out of the city, meaning in the times of the desert, that meant out of the Jewish camp. In Eretz Yisrael, that meant out of any walled city. V'tumas kol chumer tumah ha'amur b'Metzorah, and all the severity of the impurity applies even to the quarantined Metzorah. So Reb Steinzal says, the Meiri asks, if that is the case, what is the meaning of the term quarantined? If it's meant literally, the understanding would be that he must be quarantined in a specific place. The explanation means, if the idea is you just sent out, you're expelled, that's not quarantine. It means if you're adding the word quarantines means you're in a specific place. The explanation is that perhaps the quarantine leper is required to remain quarantined in a house outside the 3 camps. Why? Because once you're mukhlit, there's nothing to check. Until it goes away, you stay impure. Here, you're still, so to say, under observation, right? So in observation, you have to be out of this city, but you can't just roam anywhere because we want you to stay put. So we put you in a quarantine space, not because of you could be contaminated, but to whatever it is, to make sure that we watched you, so then we could check you after 7 days. The Gaonim explain that the term muskar means quarantine, does not mean quarantine. It means that they would frame the lesion with paint, right? So muskar means to lock in the actual leprosy. They would like take a marker or whatever they had in those days to mark it. So because you can't remember exactly, one of the signs of leprosy is if it grows. So how are you supposed to know if it grows? You can't just take a picture and remember exactly how big it was last week. So they would put let's say a marker around it today on, let's say, a Sunday. And a week from now, Sunday, if it passes that marker line, right, the marker stays for a week. So then you know that it expanded. Right? In order to ascertain at the end of the week whether or not it had spread. So now the Gemara says this: Minoni mili. How do we know that the leper of muskar, or whatever the muskar is, meaning to say the one who has to be quarantined, let's say, doesn't have to rip his clothes or grow his hair? Itani Rav Shmuel by Yitzchak Kamed Rav Huna. Rav Yitzchak, Rav Shmuel, the son of Yitzchak, learned in front of Rav Huna. V'ti haroy hakoyim misapachas hi v'chibes begode v'tar. Tahar mi priya uprima d'mikar. Okay. The meaning to say that the v'tiaroi means v'tiaroi hakoyim misapachas hi v'chibes begode v'tar, and he's pure, right? The priest shall pronounce him clean. It is but a scab, and he shall wash his clothes and be purified. Vitar, he shall be purified. Tar mi prio prima to mi ikara, meaning to say that he's pure from before. He doesn't have to do things that he would have had to do. He doesn't have to do certain things. It's talking about in the past, not going forward. It's talking about the past. What didn't he have to do? He didn't have to grow his hair and rip his clothes. Like he says over here, Reb Steinzal says, Vitar is not a future tense, which would indicate that from that point on he is purified. It's rather presents. It's rather in the present tense, indicating that at the outset, even before the priest pronounced he was pure, in the sense that he was exempt from, what was he pure from? From letting his hair and wild and to rendering his clothes. So Rashi says, Minoni mili dein priya prima. How do we know that there is no growing your hair long or ripping your clothes? Bimuskar, in someone who's quarantined. Dilma galilan rachman bemuchlat. Maybe even though the pasuk is talking about someone who's a confirmed leper, but it's only talking to the confirmed leper to teach us also about a quarantine leper. Just like Tumah, that doesn't have to say the verse all the laws in both cases. Maybe it says it in one case and we learn from the next on the previous case. So because the pasuk says vitari kol misapachas, it's only a scab. It means we don't consider it leprosy. We're talking about a leper who becomes purified after the quarantine. It means it doesn't become v'lei nechlat and doesn't become a confirmed Metzorah. The end of the pasuk says the word v'tar, again, the language, the diktuk of the word vitar means not that going forward, but that he's tar from something from before. He should become pure, meaning going forward. Lishna demikarahu, that's why it's come to teach us something from before. There were certain things he never had to become pure from, which would be other severities of Metzorah, which would mean growing the hair and letting and ripping the clothes. It's interesting because basically the pasuk, how we learn Torah is that the pasuk's choices of how it words things and how it decides to teach us things in itself is teaching us something. I mean to say the very fact that the Torah chooses a word v'taher, not vayitaher, adding a yud, which would make it mean going forward, is coming to teach us a whole law about how it means. It could have just found another way to say that a quarantine Metzorah is not included in the laws of growing the hair and rendering the clothes. But instead of having to talk about it, it just says something casually, although it's adding not just one word, it's adding v'chibas begadavim, he has to clean his clothes, v'taher, and by using that word, it also teaches, by the way, you should know that there were certain things he was never impure from. And that is, he never had an obligation to grow his hair and to rip his clothes. So now Rava says, one second, if that's how you learn the pasuk, that anytime it says v'taher and not vayitaher, means to tell us something in Mikara, that it's a status quo of where he's already pure from something as we stand now, meaning that before he never had a requirement before. So Rava says, by the zav that it says that he washes his clothes and he is pure. What is the vitaher? What is he pure from? What does it mean? What is it coming to teach us? So here Rashi says like this. Where's this pasuk? That's the same 13. Now, in the 13, again, we're talking about purifying the zav. It says v'chiyitar zav, and the zav has to become purified. Mi zavai v'safer. Okay, we learned what those words mean. He has to count 7 days l'tarasai from when he stopped seeing his episodes. V'chibas begadav, he also washes his clothes. Now again, we've learned already this verse is also including a zav of 2 riyas, of 2 sightings. V'rachetz b'sarei b'mayim chaim, he washes his flesh in live water, meaning spring water. V'tarher, and he shall be clean. And the word v'tar means not going forward. It means he was always clean from something from before stays pure. I mean, something that from before was never affected. What are we talking about? Now, I'm just going to say outside what the Gemara is going to answer is that what happens if a person again starts seeing Tumah, again starts becoming Tameh, again becomes Tameh. Does that, and it's clearly a sign that you never got rid of the Tumah in the first place. So how do we view certain impurities? Do they carry over from one zav to the next? It means one person's set of episodes to the next. But let's just see Rashi inside. Gabi zav d'chsiv b'soif taharase v'tir, at the end of how he becomes pure, v'tir matar mikara marta. What are we talking about? V'tar. What is kind of always never been a question before? So here Rashi explains. This Rashi is out of place. It has to go over here. Ella tar hashla mitame klicheres beheset afagav dahader chazle mitame lemafreya. So he's tar hashla mitame klicheres beheset. That if there's a law of impurities by earthenware. We have things that become movement. When you move something, and if an impure person moves something, that could cause impurity, possibly. The chiddush by kli cheres is earthenware, that we learn in the laws of impurity. Again, laws of Tumah and Taharah are very complicated, but in the laws of impurity is that the kli cheres has certain things that apply exclusively to the kli cheres, to the earthenware, that is not included in other vessels. One of those things is that even just something inside of it gets impure. If you drop, let's say, a sheretz on a rope inside of it, so it makes the contents inside impure. If remember, back in the day, I don't know, maybe even today, not all certain things are considered earthenware. We don't realize it's earthenware. But for instance, certain sinks, for instance, are earthenware. Is the ovens. Back in the day, the oven was a kli cheres usually. And so the question is, how does an oven become tameh? So one of the things is that there's a unique law by zav, that if the zav just makes movement on a kli cheres, it makes it tameh. So Torah hashtem litami klicheres beheset. Afagav dahad chazulei mitamim lafreya. So if the zav becomes tar, so anything that he's going to touch afterwards, if he touches a klicheres, then it's not that movement of the klicheres. We don't say, oh, the fact that we saw now another riyah, another emission, means that he never got rid of his tumah, and therefore other things that he did in the past reveal that they would always say tameh. That applies to certain things like Rashi is going to say. It doesn't apply to the touching of a klicheres, because a klicheres is a chiddush that becomes tameh in the first place by a zav. Because it's a chiddush, we only have it in its chiddush, which means when you have something that's unique, out of the ordinary in the law, so you can't, then it doesn't have the flow of the law. It's like going against the pressure, right? So you have to prove every point of the law if it's not ordinary. So if it's if a zav just moving a klicheres makes a tameh, to then go and say, okay, now that we know that the zav can make a klicheres tameh by movement, then whatever he makes tameh would apply to the klicheres. No, every kind of chiddush in tameh, you would have to see it clearly in the klicheres, and therefore certain things that would apply to the zav will not apply to the klicheres, and that's what the pasuk is teaching us in V'tahir. Let's just see it in Rashi. Again, like I said, this is a hard Gemara. Once we finish this piece, we'll gain to easier Gemara. Ella, Rashi says, "Akarchach tar yiyeh mikan ol haba." V'tar means has to be going forward, seemingly. M'tamek klicheres beheset. V'afagav shetfilas b'yayim. V'im ra achet tfila b'boy b'yayim. Saser sakol mitam lafrei mishkav Moshe. What happens? The laws is also when does the zav go to the mikvah? The zav could go to the mikvah by day, but he doesn't. It's not confirmed until the end of the day. If he's going to have a riyah, an emission, after he goes to the mikvah, so then anything that he touched from going to the mikvah until now means the mikvah wasn't, because the emission overrides the mikvah. It's not like you become tummy after the mikvah. The mikvah didn't count because it means you never got out of your zav. So therefore, if you lied on things or you sat on things, those things also that you sat on after the mikvah, they become tummy retroactively, even though now at the time they weren't tummy because you went to the mikvah and we're hoping that you'd stay pure. But now that you saw another mission before nightfall, so then it means that there's that the mikvah didn't help, and therefore anything you sat on or lied on while you were waiting out the clock, retroactively becomes tummy. So that would apply to mishkav and Moshe. So saser sakol, everything falls down. L'mafreya, retroactively. Mishkav and Moshe, for instance, on things that you lied on or you sat on, like it says in the Gemara, Ketzat Tzaylim. The kolshkein adam, surely the person himself is retroactively tameh. Afila hachi, or things that he touched. If he touched another person, afila hachi, mahanle tefila militami klicheres. But if he went to the mikvah and he made movement of an earthenware, shehesit bein tefila liriya, after the tefila, means if he moved a earthenware before he went to the mikvah, then it's tameh. But now he went to the mikvah, he moved an earthenware, and then an hour later he had an episode of an emission. But that klicheres does not retroactively become tameh. That's the chiddush. Rashi says, the hadidashin le v'tar militame klicheres midikasvinu lahai kra baser kra ashayigu by hazav denafkla meinei has klicheres. The reason why we would apply the word v'tahar in this case to the klicheres, I mean, the laws of Metzorah are long. They're not 13, 15 verses like the laws of Zav. It's a whole two parshas talks about the laws of Zav are short, but why would we apply it specifically to this? Because the verses come right after each other. And if the verses come right after each other, we're going to say that the Torah is on the chiddush of a klicheres. And because it's an exclusive tumah that only a Zav by moving a klicheres earthenware because tameh, we're going to apply the vitar that's mikar, that's retroactively, mean to say that we don't make it tameh retroactively is being taught to us about klicheres. Okay. So, Rabbi Steinsaltz is here to help us as well. The Rambam rules that in accordance with this opinion, meaning that after immersion, if after the Zav goes to the mikvah, the Zav will render impurity retroactively if he again sees an emission on that day. Okay, that's the law. So if you see an emission after the mikvah, you make things tummy, anything you touched, which basically means, just to be cool about it, like we say, is it would make most sense for a Zav who goes to the mikvah before he waits out the clock to not touch anything. Like just try to avoid touching, because if you can have an emission again, and the chances are you possibly could have one, that's the whole point. That's why you count the 7 days. is better not to touch anything, because then you have to remember what you touched, and everything retroactively becomes tummy. However, the mission is effective as it prevents the zav from rendering earthenware vessels impure through movement retroactively. That's our Gemara. In our Gemara, Rava says Vitar is talking about that it's pure from retroactively causing impurity on movement of earthenware. Since that form of impurity is unique to the zav and is alluded to in the previous verse, like Rashi says, it is specifically from that impurity that he is purified. And therefore, that's why Vitar means that you don't have to be worried about any earthenware that you touch, meaning what's earthenware, dishes, anything. That you're hasted, that you have movement, you cause movement, then it doesn't become impure. Some question why the Rambam does not issue a similar ruling with regard to impurity caused to contents of a house that a leper enters, as that is also impurity unique to the leper. Okay, that's the question is why the Rambam doesn't, like we're going to see the next question of the Gemara, that the leper has something unique. The leper is not a dead person, but he's considered like a dead person. And therefore the leper, if he walks into a house, anything that there's an oihel, anything that there's a roof covering, and in that covering, a leper walks into the house. That's what are the things? We have leprosy causes anything in the house to become impure. So even if there's no direct contact. He says this: once a zav and a zavra immersed on the seventh day of their impurity, they no longer render earthenware vessels impure through movement, even if they experience an additional emission which would make them tamei again. They render impurity retroactively only onto a surface designated for lying and surface designated for sitting. So says the Ram Sefer Torah, etc. So now the Gemara asks the question that Reb Steinsaltz alluded to before. So maybe also there's the Metzorah when he walks into an enclosure that when he walks in there he makes it all tamei. So maybe Vitar also, because this is something unique to this Metzorah, that also he shouldn't be considered tamei. He shouldn't make these things tamei if he walked in and then the so to say the terrace showed itself. Hold on a second. See what Rosh Hashanah says up here. If someone with inconclusive symptoms of leprosy, talking about the inconclusive, was quarantined and then declared ritually pure, and subsequently conclusive symptoms of the leprosy developed after he was considered to be pure, he is not considered to have been a leper from the time of the original quarantine, in which case the contents of any house he entered from that point would be rendered impure retroactively. It means obviously, let's say a person has a terrace, and you go into quarantine a week, and it doesn't develop the signs that would make you impure. It doesn't go away, and then a week later it does develop them. So then you become impure. You become mukhlit, right? But then, or you check or whatever, you continue the process, then you become mukhlit. But then, one second, that means that you were never impure in the first place. It just took longer, let's say. So maybe retroactively everything should become impure. Any room, any house you walked into. Rather, once he is purified, he is absolutely pure, and there's no such thing as we don't go retroactively. These subsequent conclusive symptoms are unrelated to the previous inconclusive symptoms. We don't say that it's all one leprosy. Therefore, the proof adduced by Rav Shmuel Bar Yitzchak is no proof. Because Rav Shmuel Bar Yitzchak says that from the word v'taher means going forward, maybe v'taher comes to teach us that he doesn't retroactively make anything impure in between after quarantine, after he's been released from his quarantine and becomes tum again. And maybe from there we don't know that a quarantined Metzorah doesn't have to grow his hair and doesn't have to render his clothes, because the word v'tar is coming to teach us there's no retroactively. Hachinami v'tar Metzorah dehashtel mitame bebiya bechumrei Metzorah shemitame adam v'kelim hanichnasim imi lebeis shafilu chazis hamisapachas upashta v'nitma tar k'dechsivim pashta tivsha hasapachas bar ahani leitfila letar sakelim abayim imi lebeis. That we would think that let's just say the word v'tar is coming to teach us that if he has leprosy and he was quarantined, and he was purified by the quarantine, he didn't get it, and then it develops the proper leprosy, we don't say that retroactively everything that he was with, it was within his contact, or if he went into a house, made it impure. Because the law is that a Metzorah, when he walks into a place, anything that's under the same roof as the Metzorah becomes Tameh. The time of Tereskonim, Zosa Torah, L'chol nega hatzaras, l'netak l'tzaras abeged, l'bayis, ma bayis metame bebia, af kula metame bebia. Any kind of tzaras, if you bring it into a house, it makes the whole house a tameh, and anything in the house comes tameh, just as if the house itself is tameh, if there was leprosy on the walls. So how do we know that a leper of quarantine doesn't have to render his clothes and grow his hair? Because the word vitar is coming to teach us that if he goes into a house, after he gets the conclusive in between when he was purified from his quarantine after, and then he gets the conclusive taras, maybe we have to go retroactively and make everything tamei. We don't, because vitar, he's 100% pure, and we only go moving forward. So Rava says, how do we know that he doesn't have to render his clothes or grow his hair? We can't use it from the word vitar because it's coming to teach us that it doesn't retroactively create tumah from in between quarantine and muchlat. Is Rava conclusive? Rava mihachav atzaru asher bayanega mishit tzaratai taluya begufay yatzazeh shetzaratai taluya begufay she'ein tzaratai taluya begufay al biyam. The word says about the tzaras, the leper, that has to grow his hair long, which is again Leviticus 13:45. So 45 is over here. He has to rip his clothes. Grow his hair. But it's the pasuk says meaning to say, the Rashi learns, the Gemara learns that means to say that a leper, that the leprosy is on him. It's conclusive to be on his body. Means he's been muchlit. That's coming to exclude a leper whose only leprosy is based on waiting out the time of the 7 days of quarantine. This person who's in quarantine, he doesn't have the tzaras on his body yet. He's only tummy for these 7 days until we find out if that is really tzaras on his body. But if it doesn't meet the conditions of conclusive tzaras leprosy, so it's not on him. It's just the days that we're waiting to find out if he is a tzaras. So therefore, we learn from the word boy, tali begufay, not boy, tali biyamim, days. So Rashi says, can we finish through the Mishnah? Not so lucky. Okay. But let's go a little further. Asher boy, mashma misha tzarase tali tumase begufay, that the tzaras is on the body, and it has to leave the body. Not that we have to wait days. Shekol's manchlei nisrapa, as long as the person has not become healed, once he's become conclusive, a conclusive muchlat Metzorah, mimenu tami, he's always tami. V'hainu muchlat, it's only a person who's conclusive. The gabi tahara the lei ksivi hine nirpa nega atzeras min etzerua. That in order for the person to become pure, he doesn't have to wait 7 days. He has to lose the tzeras. He has to be purified. He has to be healed from the tzeras. So it's on his body because it's been conclusive. It's been muchlat. Yatsa muskar, it's coming to exclude a quarantined Metzorah who does it. We don't know yet if it's conclusive or not. Shitumasai tlui b'mehesker, that his tamah is only waiting out the quarantine time. Shimla yimtza b'yem on the 7th day it doesn't meet the criteria to be conclusive tzaras simani to tumah, which is se'er lavain. If it grows white hair, like pisain, or if it expands, is his terenu, then he becomes purified just by the days. He waited at the time. Even though he still has that wound, whatever it is not tzaras. Abai says, Almiata call you may asher nega bayitma mish tzarate tli begufa who the time shiluach ve'shein tzarate tli begufa ein tarnis shiluach. If you want to say that the word boy is coming to talk about only the muchlat, only the conclusive leper, and not the quarantine leper. So we have another verse. We said before that even a quarantine leper has to leave the camp. And in verse 1346, it says, Kol yimei asher nega bayitmai v'adad yoshev. He has to live outside the camp. Mechutz l'machne moishavai. And maybe again, this verse all the days the lesion is upon him, he, the word he, shall remain unclean. He's unclean. He has to be outside the camp. Is only referring to a conclusive, someone who's a mukhlat, a conclusive leper. And maybe the person who's quarantined doesn't have to be outside the camp. How do we know he has to be outside the camp? Kol yimei asher hanega boy shiluch ksiv b'haikra michutz l'machne me'shoyve. He has to be outside. This is just a repeat. The Rashi is twice. And if you want to say that's maybe the case, that a person who's a quarantined Metzorah, waiting out to see if it's actually tzaras, waiting out to see if it's leprosy, maybe he doesn't have to leave the camp. Maybe we just assumed he has to leave the camp. But we just said, the Mishnah just said, that the only difference is growing of the hair and ripping the clothes, meaning to say, as the Gemara said in the beginning, we understood that he has to be expelled from the camp. So, but it also has the word boy. But to be excluded from, to be expelled from the camp, and to make things impure by walking into them. Again, a Metzorah walks in these the laws of purity. The intensity of how things were in the temple is impossible to explain. Literally, I mean, not that people are lepers, but if someone had leprosy and you went under a tree, then Gemara goes into all questions. If you walk under a tree and you're both under the same shade, and it's the Metzorah is standing and you're standing, does that make you a leper? Does that make you impure from the leprosy, the person who's a leper? Because anything that's an oil, there's all kind of questions. It talks about shade and talks about just him walking into a room causes everything to become him or her. A woman could be a Metzorah too. Then it causes all the things in the house to be impure. Again, these were very intense laws. I mean, today we can't even imagine. I mean, it's hard enough to keep the laws we have now. Imagine to keep the laws of Tumah and Taharah. Again, you could become impure. No one says you're not allowed to become impure, but then you have to be aware of it, and then you have to know if you have to purify yourself if you want to go to the Beis Hamikdash. Excuse me, Amalei Yemei Kol Yemei L'Rabbis Metzorah Muskar V'Shiluach, because we have the verse itself says Kol Yemei Asher Negaboy. Why does it have to say Kol Yemei? So all the days. What's the word? All is coming to include something. It's coming to add even a Metzorah Muskar, even in a quarantine L'Shiluach. Means say when we have words that are indications, we also could have counter words, other words. So if in the pasuk where it talks about the pirua, the ripping of the clothing and the growing of the hair, the verse and the tone of the verse that says boy means to say only a person that has it on his body conclusively, not a person who's waiting out to see what happens. But in our verse where it talks about sending away the Metzorah that has to be expelled from the camp, it says kol yemei. The word kol yemei, it should have just said yemei, the days. What's kol yemei? What's it adding? So in this case, the pasuk uses words and sometimes words against each other to balance out the meaning, to know what we should understand. And in this case, the additional word kol comes to teach us that it's including something. It's including the Metzorah that's in quarantine. She also has to wait outside the camp. Yimei kol yimei. The very fact the pasuk should have just said the days of the Metzorah. The fact that it says all the days in the Metzorah. What's all the days? What does it have to add? All the days. What's the word all? Is again the Torah is not being poetic. It's being educational. It's teaching us something. It's teaching us to include even the quarantine. In this case, we won't use the word boy to exclude him. We're going to use the word kol that counters the word boy to include him. If he's so included, so why Taka doesn't the Metzorah who is muskar, who is quarantined, why doesn't he have to shave himself or herself to become clean, and doesn't have to bring the birds of atonement? And those things are not included. And the so even though he has other sacrifices, but those are sacrifices that are later. But here we're talking about on the day that he becomes pure, he has to shave himself and bring two birds. All right, we're going to finish this piece because this finishes the Gemara, so we could go into the next piece. So Abaye says the answer is because we have a pasuk to teach us that the Metzorah, who on the day of his impurity doesn't have to shave himself or herself or bring the birds on that day. When he goes out for the quarantine and he sees that, he goes out for the Metzorah and he sees that he's been purified, he's been healed. It's only talking about a person who's concluded to be a Metzorah and he has to be healed. The person who's quarantined doesn't need to be healed. Just we need conclusive evidence to know what the situation is. If the days pass and it doesn't have the laws that would conclude that he or she is a Metzorah, means he was never a Metzorah. He was never, meaning to say that therefore there's no refuah, there's no healing required. So therefore we see that only a person who needs healing, which is a conclusive leper, that person has to bring 2 birds and shave his head or her head, shave her body, sorry. So he just finishes off. We're just going to finish this off next week. Best Hashem will start with the laws of mezuzahs and tefillin. In the Jerusalem Talmud, it is derived from the language of the verse, "This shall be the law of the leper on the day of his purity." The obligation to bring offerings is incumbent upon the leper who is purified in one day. One who is healed of his leprosy, a quarantine leper must wait 7 days. Even if the lesion heals before the conclusion of that period. It means even if it goes away after 1 day, he still has to wait 7 days. With the leper who's already concluded, once it's gone, it's gone. All right, everyone. I hope you held on for the ride. It's been 2 difficult weeks of learning, and Be'ezus Hashem, we'll move on next week. Thank you so much for joining. Laila Tov.
Thanks, Rabbi.